Hey, once again, my name is Greg Shields, and I'm with Concentrated Technology. That's concentratedtech.com, and I am really excited and happy to spend a little bit of time today talking with you about Microsoft Branch Cache. I'm also happy to present to you what I think is probably one of the longest Tech Ed session titles ever. So, hopefully, at the end of this, I can at least help you understand how you can inexpensively speed up branch office access and reduce all the wasted time in your life with Branch Cache. So we'll see if that actually happens. Let me know at the end if I've actually reduced any of your wasted time, or if you've actually just wasted time by coming in here. So just let me know. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about Branch Cache here today. Now, what's interesting about the Branch Cache, I don't know, it actually makes this difficult as an instructor, but what's interesting about Branch Cache is there's nothing really to see. Branch Cache is magic, and it operates pretty much completely below the layer of your visibility. You turn the silly thing on, and, well, it just sort of works. It is honestly, in my 15-plus years of working with Microsoft and other technologies here in IT, one of the most just sort of set it and forget it sort of things that I've seen. And what's cool about it is that if you have branch offices today, and obviously you probably do because you're here right now, if you have those branch offices today, you can kind of just light up the thing, walk away, and then it will do whatever it needs to. It will accelerate whatever it needs to, and whatever it doesn't, and you're just a little bit happier than you were before. Now, what's interesting is even though we're in a relatively large presentation today too, I want to spend some time, and I got a couple of discussion topics for you to prepare for whenever we're talking about how we might implement this. So get your brain on this morning for helping me out to understand how you might be interested in using this, because I just want to get a feel for what your interest level is in Branch Cache. Now, as I said, there's just not that much to see, so what I do need to do over the next 75 minutes or so is to help you at least understand what's going on in that magic that you can't see much of. So I'm going to sit through a series of slides here, and bear with me, because I want to show you really why this thing is doing what it's doing and why it kind of just works. Okay? Does that work? Is that going to work? All right, let's begin. So what is the problem with branch offices? Right? What is the problem with branch offices? Right? They're slow, right? Well, you know, branch office users are people too. Right? Contrary to what kind of network connection we would give them sometimes, they are people too. You know, you're exactly right. Their connection to the LAN, unfortunately, includes this hop through this sometimes nasty WAN. Right? You may have set up some sort of MPLS connection, or you may have set up some sort of DMZ, or you may have just opened up every port on your firewall to the internet and said, here, come on in. I don't know. Hopefully you haven't done that. But their connection to the LAN includes that hop, and so when they're working in and amongst themselves, all of their files are relatively fast. But all the files that you like to keep in your single centralized, we like to keep things single and centralized, IT store in the main office, so accessing those files is relatively slow. And so consequently, those users in the branch offices often suffer because of that WAN delay. That's bad for business. Right? It's bad for you too, right? Because what happens whenever a user can't access what they need to? It becomes your fault. Right? Sometimes users don't understand the laws of physics, I think. You don't understand the tube is like this big between us and you. And you're trying to download, the entirety of the second Smurfs movie. I don't know. So there are more problems, though. Right? We talk about Branch Cache, and maybe Branch Cache is probably poorly named. But a branch office doesn't necessarily need to be an office that exists in a branch location, right? It's just any location that is a LAN, so I've got a geographic location of fastness separated by a large empty river of slowness. So when we think of slow here, we think of something that is less than what we traditionally consider to be LAN speed. So even if you aren't a branch office-oriented people, then you can still make use of this. Now is this you? Do you all have branch offices? Are you all sort of branch office-oriented then? Even if you aren't, you can still benefit from this. This still is relatively cool for you. So the problem, however, is that, well, more than anything, we don't all have lots and lots of money. Anybody here have lots of money? Like unlimited IT budget? Really? Who do you work for? Oh, I was going to say, that never happens. And more importantly, too, not all of us are these big enterprise companies either, right? If you're a big enterprise company, you might have a big main office and you might have a relatively big branch office too. Well, there are technologies out there that can support those needs. You'll probably find them down here in the expo, these WAN optimizers and WAN accelerators and things like that. Now, the problem with branch offices and how it relates to these WAN optimizers is just simply the fact that, well, have you ever spec'd out some of the costs on some of these WAN optimizers? They're very expensive. And if you're like me and you're trying to save costs here, well, okay, I need to be able to accelerate some of the files and folder accesses to these people that are in branch offices. But why are they a branch office in the first place? Because there ain't many people there. So consequently, sometimes these WAN optimizers are the sledgehammer approach. So what is the ball-peen hammer problem? We just need faster access to some websites, some internal websites and some files. We don't need everything accelerated. We just need a little bit. And it's hard to justify that expensive cost for creating essentially a piece of hardware that sits on their end and a piece of hardware that sits on your end that makes all of that jive. So what we need, and this is sort of the use case that Microsoft worked with in creating this branch office solution. What we need is an inexpensive, cost-effective solution that doesn't require on-site hardware. Right? I don't want to go and have to deploy something out to the branch office because have you been to Poughkeepsie? It's a long drive. Right? It's 2-lane roads to get there, and I don't want to have to drive there every so often and go fix the problem. No one here is from Poughkeepsie. It's a wonderful place. Now, those solutions at the same time also need to be kind of future-proof or scalable should you maybe need hardware into the future. So we have to have some sort of solution that doesn't cost us much, but is also potentially scalable into the future. Most of us just need something that improves basic file and folder access, websites, internal websites maybe, and maybe a few applications. Would you agree? Would you agree? Give me a hey yeah. Yeah. So the solution is, let's throw something there. I guess the question is, right, what do we have at those websites, or at those branch locations? We got PCs, we got Windows, right? It's already there. So if it's already there, then why don't we use what's already there and, well, deploy out our applications using what we already have. Now, remember, branch cache is not the panacea, right? The big fancy word that journalists use to describe the end-all be-all of everything. This is another one of the tactics that you can use for accelerating things, like remote desktop services, right? Citrix XenApp, whatever. There are lots of solutions at your disposal with which to speed up those remote locations. But this is yet another tool in your quiver to improve this process. The solution, obviously, because you're here, is branch cache. Now, what does it do? Branch cache caches content from your main office servers to your branch office locations. Okay, so you can either cache that content to a specifically configured branch cache server, right? Some server that you put in that remote site, or you can put it to one or more desktops in the branch office. We've all agreed that one of the things that we have in those branch offices is Windows. So maybe I don't want to put a server down there. Maybe instead of putting a server down there, I just want to cache the content to all of the individual Windows desktops that happen to be distributed around in that location. This is completely a configuration with branch cache. Now, what kind of things can I cache? Right. files and folders. Right? I need to access this Word doc. I need to access this Excel spreadsheet. HTTP sites, intranet HTTP sites, HTTPS sites, those sorts of things. Any kind of bits-enabled application. Right? You know of one. I got one right up there on the slide, WSUS. So I could potentially cache some of that WSUS stuff. Does the application of Windows patches give you nightmares still today across branch office links? Sometimes. Yeah? And really any tool or service or application or widget or GJA or whatever that makes use of SMB, HTTP, and the bit stack. So it's all this is magic, right? And I don't even work for Microsoft. I just think it's magic. So how does this work? So branch cache, when you install branch cache, you think of it kind of a shim that sticks underneath HTTP and SMB. So this shim that sticks underneath these two protocols effectively accelerates anything that leans on top of them. We're looking at Office here and, I don't know, copying files and Windows Explorer and SharePoint and Office, again, with HTTP and bits and Windows Media Player, which I think was kind of cool. And something else that's very rezzed out right now, Windows Explorer. So anything that uses those protocols is going to be transparently and automatically cached by branch cache. It just, poof, it just works. Because its existence, where it sits right there in that, underneath that stack, means that, well, anything that has to do with that stack is going to get automatically cached. Now, the result of this is that you don't have to go and educate your users to do anything different. And you're welcome. Because you know that trying to educate them to do anything different can be somewhat challenging, right? Because it sits in that location, users just simply access their files in the same locations they're used to. What's the name of your primary file server? I'm sorry? Dayton File. So when his users need to go and get Word docs, they go to whack Dayton File / whatever. Once you implement branch cache, they will go to whack Dayton File / whatever. No change in process, right? But under the covers, without their paying attention, they're transparently redirected to a locally cached copy if that copy exists. Now, I just said this is magic. This isn't magic. Right? We have to have, obviously, one initial download of this copy. Somebody's got to access it one time and pay the tax. After one person has downloaded it and paid the tax, then subsequent downloads are going to get accelerated. So we have to cache the first one first, and then further ones are going to get accelerated. Now, how does this work? So the very first time somebody accesses, this is your classic Microsoft diagram. The client, which is there in the middle, highlighted in yellow, is going to send a request for content to the main Office content server to whack Dayton File. Okay, and in that content, the client's going to go, yo, I am branch cache aware. So when that happens, the content server is going to give this client a bunch of what we call previously generated content, and I hold your questions, I'm going to get to that. So it's going to send this previously generated content from its cache back to client 1, and client 1 is going to say, you know what, hey, everybody, does anybody have my file? Does anybody have my file? And everybody on your local net, the branch, is going to go, no. When that happens, then the client then says, hey, yo, I'm going to need the file. And that's all that happens. Right? This is the initial access in the distributed cache mode. Now, when it's not available locally, your main file server is then going to send that file back down to the client. It really adds insignificant amount of time to ask all of those clients and then ultimately get the response. With the subsequent requests. Now this client, tell me your name? Russ. Russ here has downloaded the PTO spreadsheet because he's a domain admin and can automatically approve his own PTO. So Russ has downloaded the PTO spreadsheet from Dayton-file. And the first time, well, it was slow because it wasn't cached. But the second time, Russ has now downloaded the file and made a change. So, tell me your name. Tell me your name again. Giovanni here then says, I need to go and request a PTO spreadsheet. So Giovanni goes and makes a second request. So in this case, Giovanni still goes to whack Dayton dash file and says, hey, I need the PTO spreadsheet. The server is going to give it this magical previously generated content to help Giovanni determine whether or not the file is available. Giovanni's then going to go, yo, hey, anybody around's got this file? Anybody around got this file? And Russ's PC over here is going to go, yeah, actually, I got it. Giovanni then says, all right, give it to me. And then Giovanni gets that file. So making this happen is this, again, somewhat magical bit called previously generated content, or content metadata, or data about data, or a guidepost for what has already been brought down. Now here's where things get really cool. Take the content, okay? Take the PTO spreadsheet and break it up into a series of blocks or chunks. For each of those blocks, then let's take and do a hash, a segment hash of that block. So I will take a big piece of data and represent it by a very small piece of data. Right? This is just a hash. This is not like a WinZip. This is not like compression. This is just hashing that data. And I can get like 2001 compression on this because I'm squishing this stuff down into a number. One file is going to have many blocks. So the PTO spreadsheet is probably 10 megs in size. I don't know how much time you take off, Russ. But that file gets broken up into discrete blocks, and those individual blocks are what comprise this previously generated content. Think about this. I'm taking 10 megs and I'm breaking it down by 2001 or so. I've got, I don't know, 50 blocks. I'm making up numbers here, 500 blocks, whatever. And each one of those blocks represents not just the spreadsheet, but a piece of the spreadsheet, right? Some piece of the spreadsheet. Now, these segment hashes provide a unit of discovery. Do I have that block locally somewhere in my collection of desktops? And the individual block hashes provide a unit of download. So when Russ goes and downloads the PTO spreadsheet and uses his domain admin privileges to go and give himself all the PTO he wants, he's obviously changing the spreadsheet, right? So, but he's not doing a lot of changes to the spreadsheet because Giovanni's got stuff too here as well. He's probably only changing some of the content of the spreadsheet. So what exists at the local site is most of the file. Just a little bit that's changed. Just give me the tiny bit that I need that's been changed up at the main location. This is what it kind of looks like. So I have my data that's been broken up into blocks here, right? And then I create these hashes of those blocks, and then I hash the hash, more or less. And ultimately what I get is this ability to determine whether or not I have that piece of content or not. I mean, this is kind of simple. We've been doing hashing forever. Linux has had the SHA-1, whatever, SHA-1 something for a long time now. This is not anything new or exciting, what we're doing here. But what we are doing is creating this really nifty catalog of all this data that we potentially could have in our environment. Now, there are two ways in which we can do this. And again, I'm going to show you kind of the very limited amount of demo here in just a minute. But there are two ways in which we can do this. One way is, all right, we're going to download all this stuff to Russ and Giovanni's machines here, right? Because those machines exist in that location. And so they can multicast with each other and determine what sorts of content they have. I have to have Windows 7. I have to have Windows Server 2008 R2, which is perfectly fine because every single one of you here is at 100% Server 2008 R2 and Windows 7, right? Hold them high, right? Yeah. Really? Score. Anybody else? Hold them high. 100%. All right. Are we getting close? Are you closer? You're laughing, so. Well, listen to Microsoft. They want you to get there because then you can have fun things like this. To be honest, actually, so this is one of those technologies that's available in 7. At least to me, it's one of the kind of the reasons, at least, to move to 7, because you just, like I said, you just turn this thing on and it works. Now, is there any security people in the room? Who's a security person? Anybody? Nobody's a security person? Oh, cool. We can talk about them. If you're put your security hat on for a minute. The whole idea of distributing that content out to those systems might itch you funny. Many of us it wouldn't necessarily, but for some of us it might itch us funny. And we might have a server that's sitting in that remote office, not always, but if we did, maybe instead of actually distributing the content around, maybe I want to put it on a single host. I could do that. The hosted cache mode allows you to install a server at that branch office, which is configured with branch cache. And the desktops will still do all the stuff that they're doing, but instead they'll shove it over onto this server so it's in this nice protected area. So we have 2 modes, right? Distributed and hosted. The process that I go through with the hosted mode is only slightly different. What's different is instead of actually going to the individual desktops and multicasting around with those individual desktops, that client is going to actually receive the content from the hosted cache server. It's ultimately, as well, the hosted cache server is later going to connect to the client and download that, whatever it's got, to its cache. Okay, so there's a little bit more participation there from that cache server. Really, really exciting stuff here. So that was the initial access. This is the subsequent access. And on the subsequent access, same thing. Content information is received. The hosted cache server down here on the side is participating in this whole thing. And all of my nice content gets stored in one location, which makes my auditors very happy. Both of these are perfectly acceptable configurations because both include the necessary components in order to secure it and to authenticate it and all of that stuff. But what's most important, if you take one thing away from you in this session today, you should take away from you the notion that in the initial access, what the user does is always to that main office content server. They don't have to do anything different. And that's what's really particularly cool. Now let me ask you, in your environment, all right, so what would you use and why? Just what are your thoughts? Over there. Multicast is a requirement for the distributed mode, when I've got it at workstations to workstations. Okay, and then so continue. Okay, so I've got a couple of people here, and maybe this makes sense over, for a couple of people. And yeah, over on this side, I got 25 people. I got a server over there. Might as well just turn it on the server. Okay, that makes sense. Others? He said in some foreign countries we have space limitations on the server, so we might have to go to the distributed mode. Hold that thought, because there's some configurations you can do to ensure that it's not just going to blow up all the space in your server. That's really nice. Yeah. Excellent question. So he says, what if I have multiple offices that are using the same document? And the changes, how do I keep the changes in sync? Well, remember, what's the very first location that I go to check for the document? That original central server. So that original central server becomes truth. And if I just so happen to have the bits locally, I'll just download them locally. So that's how you can protect yourself from that somewhat nasty situation that's you're thinking of. Yeah. So, another valid question. He says, what happens if I lose communication with my central server? Where's the first place I go? The central server. So you're screwed. Again, this is not a solution for everything, but it's yet another one of those tactics that you can use for solving this whole problem. Another arrow for your quiver. Yeah. Does cache mode work with legacy clients? No. So Windows 7, Enterprise, Ultimate. This is one of those wags to get you on a 7. In neither mode, because I have to have a client piece there. In the back. He asked, does it maintain file locks? Hold that thought for just a minute. You had a question too in the back. He asked, could it take the load off the hardware? Well, potentially. It could take the load off the hardware. Remember, I have to start the process by talking to that original server, and I'm going to get a little bit of data, the representations of data, but I'm not going to have to download all the data. So file copy is, it's not so much difficult on the hardware. It's more difficult on the network, but it's designed specifically to take the load off the network. So very good point there, too. Yeah, one question here. Again, SMB, HTTP, bits. All three of those are fully SharePoint supported. So, yeah.
Is there a version requirement on the content server? So if the file server is the 2003 server.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. One more question here. No, the universe explodes. I couldn't help myself. He said if there's two clients that start at exactly the same time, is there some sort of prevention mechanism for that? To be honest, that is, I don't know, but that would be so unbelievably well timed that you would have to like done that on purpose, I think. Yeah, but even so, there's going to be differences in time there too. Again, I didn't write this. I'm just the stand-up comedian that comes and talks about it. So one assumes that that's in there. One more question.
In case if I decided to have a server, can I have a DFS in cache?
Hold that thought. Hold that thought for just a minute. Hold that thought. I like it. See, all this excitement. Let me get through a couple more slides, and I'll open up for questions here in just a minute. So all of these are great questions. First of all, it shows interest in here and the fact that this is relatively easy to use. So some of these questions, and I'll get to your question here in just a minute, some of these questions can be answered with just a little bit more explanation of what this thing can do. Right? So obviously there are some concerns associated with this distributed mode. As the size of my office gets bigger, I may not want to use my Windows 7 desktops as content storage locations, right? It's just going to burn up drive space on the desktops. There is going to be a very slight increase in processor use because, I mean, let's be honest, I'm copying a file off of those desktops. If I move to hosted mode, well, then I'm also going to eliminate the need for that multicasting sort of stuff around the local net. Now, subnets. Most of us kind of associate our subnets with our geographic locations, right? Not all of us, but some of us do. And the subnet tends to be the boundary of multicast. So having multiple subnets with distributed mode means that I'm creating, just like someone said over here, kind of these content islands, right? The Poughkeepsie and then the Walla Walla office are going to have different islands of content there. So we have to be conscious of that, but that might be okay. Also, what if that office is, what if it's laptops, right? And Dan and Stan and Bob and Bill, they go home at night. Well, if those guys go home at night, or maybe they leave on vacation, they're taking a piece of that content with them whenever they go. So if they're not going to be sitting there all the time, maybe distributed mode isn't a great idea because my cache is constantly going to be adjusting. This is okay because remember how that whole process works. Hey, file server, do you have the file? Yes, I do. Here's the metadata. Hey, anybody got pieces of it? And people that will. So if I have laptops that are going in and off the network, that can be kind of a concern there. There's also better bandwidth savings in comparison to. A little bit better bandwidth savings. I can direct everybody to a single location. Sometimes those branch offices don't necessarily have the best equipment. Anybody here got their branch offices on a hub these days? Or something you bought at Best Buy? It's okay, so do I. So a larger office is probably going to need more cache data and really probably can just justify that server purchase. It's also better for auditing too, right? Because I can add all that stuff in one location, makes things easier. These are the protocols that are in use. Okay, I use SHA-256 to hash. I talked about the protocols. That is the initial client communication. There's a new one, or a series of new ones, the Discovery Protocol, which leans on web services, or WS. I have the Retrieval Protocol and then the Cache Protocol. Okay, so there's going to be some protocol work involved here too. You'll find these if you've got host-based firewalls. You're going to see these in your list of experiences whenever you're configuring that firewall. So a couple of things to do if I'm dealing with the firewalls here. Not too bad. But what's really sexier about this is the security features that are built in. Okay, somebody asked the question, well, is this going to respect my existing ACLs? Yeah. Right? If I'm going to go and host content onto, his laptop, or his, either one of you guys, I wouldn't trust you. We haven't even met. I don't know who you are. So I don't necessarily want you to have access to my wife's checking account number or the actual spreadsheet for the company. We're losing money horribly. So the ACLs that are in place on the original system, right, on the original server, are going to be respected. So branch cache respects NTFS ACLs at all time. There's also the concern that as I'm transferring all this stuff all around the network, well, I want to make sure that the content is integral. So the chunking and the actual creation of these hashes ensures content integrity. I get my typical authentication and authorization not through branch cache, but through SMB HTTP. Okay? I get, by rehashing, I get post-transfer post-transfer integrity verification. If I am particularly concerned about scary things, I can also just simply encrypt the cache with EFS or BitLocker. So if somebody steals a cache server, well, they're not going to get anything. And then lastly, if I have a hosted cache, I can protect myself from a man in the middle by implementing a certificate. In fact, if you want to use a hosted cache, you've got to have some kind of certificates. One cert, real easy. So I got that stuff. In transit, SSL. Everything is encrypted in transit using AES 128 with a key that's derived from the metadata. So more or less, the stuff is encrypted or secure at rest and also secure in transit, which makes things really, really nice. So my next sort of question to you, don't worry, we're getting to the demo part, but you're going to be so amazingly unimpressed with how little there is to see that we'll just chat for a bit about it. So with this in mind, here, I got two door prizes. You guys like door prizes, right? I have an extra bag. So the tech ed, has anybody not got a bag? That doesn't mean you're getting a prize. And I have a lovely clock. I think it actually synchronizes itself automatically from the ether, the inner tubes. So my question then for the bag is this more advantageous to WAN optimizers and why? Anybody? Nobody wants the bag? I'm going for the clock. You. Is that bag worthy? No, I got a bag for one word. So talk to me about this. If I'm doing specialized protocols that don't lean on SMB or HTTP, they exist. The environments, the smaller kind of environments that may be using this may not necessarily have too many of them, but they exist. Okay? Others. Someone who wants the bag. Oh, here, I'll set it for here for you. So If the goal is to reduce servers, it could be advantageous, or if not, it may not necessarily be. Okay, I can buy that. There's another piece to this too. This is just yet another one of those, again, the arrows in the quiver for the options you have for assisting these people out in other locations. How might I merge this with other technologies, perhaps from Microsoft or other vendors, to assist in a layered approach? This one's for the clock. What other technologies are out there? Remote technologies. In the back. A DFSR or what? Potentially DFSR. Try RDS. Try RDS. Or RDS. That's worth half the clock. So these are technologies, again, that are useful to put in combination. Now remember, RDS runs on the what protocol? I don't have a prize. What protocol? RDP protocol. I'm not telling enough jokes, so you're falling asleep. So it may not necessarily be accelerated by this. This is more file-oriented. But I can use these things in combination to support different types of needs for my different types of users. Maybe in the example where I have an application that doesn't work very well because it's not SMB-oriented or HTTP-oriented, I can throw it up on an RDS server and then use RDP to present the application to those users, right? That's an option for me. If I have a webified application, right? If I've got some sort of HTTP or HTTPS application, I can throw this thing on the web server and everything gets accelerated whenever it comes down. So if I have SMB or file-oriented stuff, I'm resolved. If I've got web-oriented stuff, I'm resolved. And if I have application-oriented stuff, I can use another technology like RDS to support those needs. Full disclosure, my MVP is in RDS, so I'm kind of biased. But yeah, in the back. So that traffic in and of itself, it's just bringing it down, right? There's still chunks of traffic that's coming down. It doesn't have to see into it. It just has to know that that traffic has come down at some point. So it just cares that the hash number has already been received locally. You had a question earlier, I think. No. This isn't a memory cache. This is disk cache. They have different uses, without getting into too detailed an explanation. But come back later and we'll chat. Other questions? Yeah. The file server that I'm pulling data from also has to be R2. So, yeah, I mean, admittedly, this is kind of a wag to get you onto R2 and Windows 7. But turning it on ain't that tough. Let's talk about that. Okay, I've spent some period of time now just extolling the virtues of this magical thing that I haven't actually let you see yet. So let's actually take a look at what it looks like. As I mentioned, branch cache is available only on 7, Enterprise and Ultimate, and only on R2. So I have to have the servers and the client at that level. In order to implement it, I have to enable branch cache and create the firewall exceptions to allow the traffic between the client computers. So if I've got firewall stuff turned on, I've got to turn that on. For web server content, there is a branch cache feature on your application. So this is where it gets a little weird. There's a branch cache feature on your application server that you install to the web server. If this is a file server, you install the branch cache for network files role service that is attached to the file server role. So I'm passing files around. I've got to enable this additional role service in order to make this happen. Now, down there on the bottom, if you attempt to use a WAN accelerator, an existing WAN accelerator, you're not going to enjoy the benefits here. So don't deploy a WAN accelerator or you're kind of undoing yourself. Okay, let's take a look at this. And I just said that. And that's the perfunctory required Microsoft diagram that every tech ed presentation has to have. Well, there you go. So how do we turn this on? I need to install the branch cache for network files role service to a file server in the main office. And to do that, I'm going to go to this computer here. And this is my demo machine, I think, maybe. Monitor going to sleep. That's not good. Aha, there it is. That's not good either. I have a laptop here that actually died as we were connecting it up here, so I have to connect into a remote server. So I apologize for the non-Microsoft technology in doing this. So here's my server here. And I'm taking a look at Server Manager. Where am I at here? Group Policy Management Editor. Server Manager here. And if I take a look at the roles, I can look at the file services role, and what I need to add is the role service here associated with the branch cache for network files role service. Now, I'm not going to put you through the process of seeing how a role service is installed. We've all experienced this at this point. But that's all you have to do on the file server. You're done. If I am going to a web server or an application server, I do something very similar, but instead of doing it in the role services node, I do it in the features node. Right? So I have some sort of app server or web server, whatever. I go down here to features, and I install instead the branch cache feature. I keep choosing the wrong button here. So instead of this, I go over here to features, and I say add features, and I look for branch cache in the list of features, which we can all just pretend that that showed up. Yeah, we can pretend. I'll get there in a minute. So install the feature, and poof, it's done. This works because branch cache is effectively this shim that sits underneath. It's a piece of code that exists underneath and doesn't require anything else to be done after that. Now, I have to also configure some client policies as well. I told you I got to do some stuff at the server, and then I got to do some stuff at the client side as well. I could use group policy to do this. In fact, group policy is probably the easiest way to do this. Let me show you some of these group policies so you can see essentially how I would turn on distributed mode. In fact, there's branch cache. There, see, I've proven it. So here inside of group policy, you'll see that I have a policy that I've created, and I'm looking at computer configuration and policies, administrative templates, network, branch cache. And there are going to be, 5 policies there that are used for configuring the server side. Okay, this is the server side after I've turned it on. The first one is, turn on branch cache. Okay, you've installed it, now turn it on. Big deal. The next 2 is whether or not you want to set the branch cache into distributed mode, or you want to set it into hosted mode. Again, big deal. Do I want to turn it on? Bam, I can turn it on that way. Or do I want to turn it on? Bam, I can turn it on that way. Obviously, this should illustrate something that you could potentially turn on both modes. Do I want to configure branch cache for network files? I can do that as well. Now, here's where there's a really interesting configuration you have to be aware of. Obviously, there are going to be some sort of network speeds where it just makes sense not to invoke this at all. Maybe you have does anybody have a branch that moves around? Or that the network connection is burstable on it, that sometimes it's faster and sometimes it's slower. In this case, you may want to turn on a certain number of millisecond round-trip value, your ping value more or less. So if ping goes above a certain amount, let's just assume it's ping. If ping goes above a certain amount in terms of what the round-trip latency is between you and the rest of the universe and back, well, then go ahead and turn this on. Very nice configuration there as well. Lastly, I have one more setting here that allows me to determine how much disk space I want to use for branch cache. This is particularly handy when I have a server that's doing a lot of stuff. One of the cases over here was, I don't want to fill up the server. Well, I can set to a percentage of the total disk space and fill up just to that certain percentage. Obviously, I'm going to start pushing this stuff out as it's not being used. What is it, first in, last out, or whatever? in terms of how the threading of this content comes through. So more important content is going to replace less important content based on when I hit that maximum amount of disk space that I want to support. Those are the settings at the server side. And as I said, there's just simply not much there. At the client side, there's actually just one thing you have to do. Or excuse me, that's the other way around. Those were the clients, this was the server. At the server side, I have to turn on what's called hash publication for branch cache. And what this does is effectively determine what types of content or where the content is that should be hashed so that branch cache can use it. I've got three options. One is to allow hash publication only for the shared folders where branch cache is enabled. One is to just disallow it, and one is to allow it. There you go. So a little bit at the client side, a little bit at the server side, and that's how we ultimately implement branch cache. If I do have firewall settings, which some of us do inside our LAN, if I have firewall settings, I can create an exception for those two predefined experiences, branch cache content retrieval and branch cache peer discovery. Okay, open those up through the firewall and poof, I'm going to be able to do that. The last thing that needs to be done, if this is a web server, I'm done. It's just working and doing its merry thing. If this is a file server, I have one more step that's involved, and it's here inside of share and storage management, in that I actually need to check the box on particular shares to tell it I want to enable branch cache. So I can show you back here at a share and storage management. If you've seen this wizard before here in R2, I can just pick a share, choose properties, go to go to advanced and caching, and bam, there's the checkbox. This is grayed out because I haven't installed the role service yet. But once the role service is installed, that gray box will be ungray. You're done. If I desire to add hosted mode, I want to protect that content just a little bit more when I move into hosted mode. So all the things that I did before make sense, but I also need to install and configure a Server 2008 R2 machine and install some sort of trusted web server certificate to the server. What's useful about this is it's one certificate for the entire server, for the entire office. So I can very easily create a search services one. If it's trusted in my environment, well, then I'm not going to have any problems. So I have to install the trust chain there. Install the branch cache feature. There's a little netsh command here you'll need to use to import that certificate in and associate it with branch cache's app ID. Okay, that's the only real manual part. And then I can use this second netsh command here, netsh branch cache set cache size, to set whatever size I want on that server. And it's kind of the same thing as what I showed you here just before. All right, sit back, relax, and enjoy. One final netsh command that may be useful for you is the netsh branch cache show status all command, which gives you a very nice verification that branch cache is doing exactly what it needs to do. I see here that the service is running, whether or not it's running on battery power or not. I've disabled the service if it's running on battery power, what the current status is, cache sizes, whether or not the networking is working right or configured correctly here for the different firewall rules and reservations and things like that. But more or less, that's the process that I use to manage the thing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, branch cache ends up being some sort of solution that is yet another piece of my quiver that assists me with making that whole lovely experience for those poor branch office people just that much more fun. So, as I mentioned before, my name is Greg Shields, and I'm with Concentrated Technology. I get an opportunity to visit so many of these conferences every year. I think I visit like 10 or 12 a year. And myself and the other members of Concentrated Tech, unlike a lot of speakers, we give away our slide decks for free. And they're on our website. We love to share them with you. You're welcome to use them for your own purposes, nefarious or not. I'd love to give you a card too, or just meet you. If you have further questions, come on up here. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you about branch cache today, and I hope to see you again another one of these. Take care.